So Doug, we're back quicker maybe than we thought talking about Sean Diddy Combs and this pretty sensational verdict, which has seen him beat the most significant charges that he was put on trial for. Explain to us what end of it, this case, he's won and what end of it he's lost.
Well, he beat the most serious charges of all, the racketeering, which was the top one, the sex trafficking. So they got him on 2 counts of, I think we mentioned this last time I was on there, the Mann Act, MANN, which is basically a very old statute about transporting prostitutes across state lines. So they got him on the 2 lowest counts, which were indisputable. He did pay sex workers, but he beat the overarching racketeering, which was this giant criminal enterprise, and for which he was looking at life in prison. And these 2 counts are 10 years maximum each. But I'm sure you've heard as much as I have. He's a first offender. He's as much dirt and baggage as the guy has. He's never really been convicted of anything. So as a first offender, there are sentencing guidelines with the feds, and it could be as little as months.
Yeah, I mean, usually mitigating circumstances that be taken into effect would be, people's, if they have not offended before and don't have criminal convictions. Usually if they plead guilty, they get a little bit of a concession there now. So the fact that the trial went ahead will go against him. And maybe the cost of this trial might go against him just on those particular convictions. But there'll be a lot of other things, people who have, they have letters from, I'm actually just come out of a sentencing today to do with a drug shipment, a conspiracy to import a huge amount of cocaine, and each and every one of the 8 people involved had a series of letters from sisters, brothers, cousins, you name it, saying what good guys they were really and family men. So all that sort of stuff can be taken into account, certainly by the judges on this side.
We call that ties to the community.
Right.
And I've been asked by mobsters, hey, Doug, those letters help. Would you write one for my daughter, Miranda, to get into university? And while you're at it, you got your laptop. But write that letter to the judge. They do, it shows, hey, you're not going to flee. Yeah. But I must say that Combs, by the way, I don't know that many mobsters, but I have been asked by some people to write it. But he was denied bail. Everybody, these legal experts that you and I both have been listening to have said, oh, come on. He beat everything. I'm sure they're going to give him bail. So he's sitting in that nasty solitary confinement until at least October. And that is unusual because he posed what the judge felt was a credible threat to go after witnesses, not to flee, because clearly he's probably thinking, I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist. But he posed enough of a threat of maybe retribution, of either violence or just nefarious behavior, that they didn't even give him bail until sentencing. So that's an indication that the judge probably said, you're not going to skate completely on this. So he'll be waiting there till we'll know in October.
Yes, and by that point, if he is sentenced, he could very well be sentenced and have served all his time. So you could see him being sentenced on that account and walking free, which is going to be a circus. And in actual fact, really, I think that the ripple effects of this, what has happened here, is going to go on and on. You're seeing kind of opinion pieces in all the major media, and discussions are beginning about this. I see a lot of commentary around, is this the end of that sort of Me Too movement responses by the state? This was an enormous trial. This was actually a very ambitious trial by the state to go after him on these racketeering charges, and in particular in front of a jury, because, juries are ordinary people, men and women of ordinary society. And sometimes the nuances of the legal thing, I sometimes think they don't totally get it, nor would I. Often on organised crime charges, on money laundering charges, etc., you see in the special criminal court here, which is a 3-judge court, they completely get, obviously, all the legal aspects of it. But you put that in front of a jury and you've got different emotions coming in. Now, in this case, for me, as regards this whole situation, the coercive control, the racketeering, etc., what you had for the jury was, you had this really insidious lifestyle. I'm not sure many people thought it was particularly nice or romantic. It was all awful, and these freak out parties. Was it freak out parties?
Freak off.
Freak off, freak off, freak off parties and everything. But at the same time, you were seeing these very lengthy relationships and women not walking away. We didn't see expert witnesses coming forward, did we, explaining the coercive control, what it really means, and how people react within those relationships?
Yeah. I felt like, I think I said to you on our last podcast, that the federal government's forensics expert, their psychologist, didn't fully explain. I got into this nuance of what they call the learned helplessness, where, you can stay in a relationship. Dogs were shown to have not been able to escape after enough. They learned to not expect anything better than this shock. And this was, so that is but I mean, it's hard to explain that to the layman. You're very, very right. They reached for the stars with this RICO Act, which I think we've discussed this before, but not everybody heard our previous podcast. So there is no such thing in European law, or you do have racketeering, as I understand it, in Ireland, as far as financial things. There's a kind of
money laundering. You mean charges?
Well, you can be charged. You can be charged in a kind of conspiracy about, but it's very. I don't know if you have the same issue of where a boss only has to be aware of what his underlings are doing in this. This statute was developed for organizations like the mafia, not only the mafia, but where obviously John Gotti or Al Capone or the boss of bosses is not pulling the trigger, and he might not even be telling a guy he might be telling his underling. But if they can prove that there's a hierarchy, a boss, an underboss, a lieutenant, a soldier, well, I guess I could say him, Sammy the Bull Gravano. He's, was the super snitch. What do you call it over there? Supergrass. He's got a podcast, and he was going on about Diddy saying, this guy should be buried under the jail. He's a scumbag. I've got daughters, I've got granddaughters. But he also said, this isn't a RICO case. I know more about racketeering than anybody. The jury's not going to understand that they didn't bring out enough of the hierarchical. And there were people they could have called. I think they felt maybe they wouldn't have testified. So let's say they had proved that he ordered his second in command and his third, which he did have these security people. They didn't really prove it. They had his assistants. And what I've seen, and this is it's a sad thing to see it actually. I saw, some black women on, I guess it's on social media saying, well, great, this means black women, black women are just fair game. No one will believe black women. Then I saw this NFL player, you probably saw this too, saying, oh, give me a break. She was Cassie was no victim. She was enjoying every minute of it. One of Kim Porter is the deceased mother of Sean's some of Sean's children. Her best friend came out and said, praise Jesus, praise the Lord, Sean's free. It's just, it's split everybody into this tribal, I don't know what to call it, but it's you're in these silos of information. Like, no, those girls loved every minute of it. They were just versus.
So in other words, what they've been trying to do, to go back to the RICO and of course all the mafia and the organised crime. So in trials where you've got here in this country, somebody could go on trial for directing a criminal organisation. That's being the boss really of it. So the criminal organisation and organised crime is really quite simple to understand as a concept. There is a boss, everybody has a role, and everybody is doing things to make money. So they're making money out of illegal and ill-gotten gains in trafficking in weapons or in drugs or whatever. But you were trying to apply this essentially in this Diddy case into a celebrity world where people are more employed in normal jobs than we would if we were asked to consider jobs in organised crime. We understand that there's illegalities going on and all the rest of it. But you're trying to transfer that whole thought process into a world where this celebrity is quite openly doing and enjoying this lifestyle where people are following orders, but they're also in more legitimate jobs. So it's quite confusing.
And it was an extreme prosecutorial overreach. I think I said this the last time we spoke. look, in the mafia, we might as well just talk about mafia stuff for a minute because that's where this applies. If the boss in the U.S. mafia, or this goes back to Sicily and the Camorra and the Ndrangheta, the mafias of Italy, if the boss calls you and you don't come, it's death. You must come if the boss calls. If you are ordered to do a hit and you don't do it, you're dead. So the consequences of not following those orders are pretty clear. If you put, and I some of these rules do get broken, you can't put your hands on a made guy. Once you're a made man, you're an official inducted person in the U.S. Mafia. You can't touch that man's wife. They're not even supposed to put hands on each other. A fist fight, that could be a death sentence. So there you see the consequences. The consequences, if this was racketeering, sorry, I'm not trying to laugh because I read one of your comments on YouTube saying this fellow's laughing. I'm almost nervously laughing because let me be clear, this is disgusting stuff. I have a daughter. I have a mother. I mean, this is nothing to smile about. But the consequences for Cassie not obeying might be you're not going to get your album released, or his assistant who testified to being abused and beaten. Well, you'll be fired. I mean, so it's a vastly different.
Very, and it's just not so black and white. And then you have kind of into that, trying to have people to consider all this within the world of sex, where consent and, adults making decisions are not, or, so it just seems to be a hugely complex position to have put the jury in. Now, the jury have acquitted him. They found him not guilty. So they're pretty much saying, actually, we're not confused. We don't believe he's guilty of these things.
And it was 12 hours when they sent back that they had decided pretty much everything except the top count. So that's remember, this was 8 weeks. It cost the government, they're saying 10 million. Sean Combs probably spent 8 million in his own defense. So to not even deliberate, they must have just said, okay, let's all agree. There was no record. They went through, we've got them on these couple things. They had a couple things to clarify. So I'm sure the prosecutors were forgive me. They were freaking out saying 12 hours. Either they're getting them on everything, which was the opposite. They obviously did not believe that there was any proof of an organizational structure.
Or they certainly felt there was, so the burden of proof is lower in this, is it, than in criminal cases? But is it reasonable doubt is brought in here, or how is the burden of proof?
Yeah, reasonable doubt, and only one, on a jury of 12 men and women, only one person has to say, it has to be unanimous, and it has to be, if they had even one reasonable doubt that this was not a willing act, let's say. So, we've got that issue. We've also got the issue of, I think people need to understand, and being an American by citizenship, but I was raised in Canada. Judges are elected in the United States. They run for office. They're members of political parties on a state and local level. So people run for judge, and then judges on the federal level are appointed by the president. So the party in power, Trump's been able to appoint lots of prosecutors are also political animals. So there's a huge amount of incentivization to go after big fish. I'm sure there's lots of criminal activity going on that within corporate America. They did bring down this sex cult that was a kind of in New York State. It was a similar kind of case, which they convicted the guy. But this was, I forget the name of it right now, but it was sort of like, the front was makeup and lifestyle stuff, but the women were being branded, and they were all sex slaves to the boss of the organization, and they got him. But there was a lot more evidence of real horrific violence that was not in. I hate that word domestic, but you know what I mean. Relationship violence, which is different than I suppose. If, let's say. A news organization in Europe or the BBC or something, it was people found out that the employees were being beaten with sticks if they didn't report the story. I mean, that would be big news, but this is not, that's not, they didn't have a chance of even proving that. And I think the prosecutors reached for the stars thinking, well, who knows? I'm not a mind reader, but they must have said something like, this is so disgusting. And we've got him beating her on video that let's just call it racketeering. Maybe they just said, you know what, because it was a repulsive, everything about the man and the actions and seemed so disgusting. But maybe they thought that would just sway the jury into thinking, yeah, I mean, he's a bad guy. He's guilty of everything.
Well, look, they've made a decision to put him on trial in this hugely public arena in Manhattan. And this trial has been, broadcast. We're talking about it here in Crime World in Ireland. It's been across the globe. And the state come out of it not so good because they've punched too high in this case. And in a way, they're lucky that Combs has been found guilty on the other two lower counts because it means that he can't come after for costs because he has got two guilty convictions there at the very least anyway to deal with for the moment. So he's financially hit to the tune of whatever you've worked out there that he's lost out of his $400 million fortune. I personally think he's ruined, anyway now as a brand, given the evidence that we've heard and everything else. He's happy in court this week. He looks at his family, he smiles, he tells them we've got this. He's been confident all the way through, which is essentially part of his personality. But his big problem now is that they are discussing about 66 civil lawsuits coming at him. And these are relating to other allegations of this kind of thing that has happened to women who claim that he has done various things to them. And these are civil actions where the burden of proof is lower, where the burden of proof, where the evidence doesn't have to be beyond reasonable doubt. It can be a lesser doubt in your mind and you can still find guilty. And I suppose you have Combs going into these, be they settlements, they won't ever get to court. But if he goes to court, you have him going in. It'd be very hard for him to charm any jury or to be at this stage.
He will be sued in the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. There's no doubt about that. And I mean, you and I both remember, maybe your younger listeners don't, O.J. Simpson. He beat the murder. It was very similar in a way because the evidence seemed very clear to a lot of people that he had motive, he had opportunity, all the things we look for, but he beat that case. Well, what then happened? Then the Goldman family, then they sued. I don't know if this was probably followed fairly extensively in Ireland too, back in those days. And they sued him. That's where they really got him. And then he just, he claimed poverty, he claimed all sorts of things. But that man was so insane that he then went and did something else violent and they got him on that. But yes, he ended up losing. O.J. Simpson lost a huge amount of a settlement to the family so he was proven to have committed wrongful death, even though he was not convicted of murder. So I imagine there'll be a lot of lawsuits. As a brand, I heard some people in the pub kind of joking, not joking. Again, there's nothing funny about this, but saying, can you imagine this guy coming back from this? And I said, well, let's say there's a welcome home party. Who would go to a Diddy party? I mean, just imagine among his celebrity friends, Jay-Z, who is going to be photographed going to a party, even if it was just like he used to have these white parties, which were dress all in white, and you've got pictures of all sorts of celebrities. There's photos with Donald Trump and Obama and everybody in the world who, with any kind of name recognition and status in American society, in an Irish celebrity, Colin Farrell, who would go to a party around this man anymore? It's going to sully your whole reputation. So I don't see him bouncing back in any, but he will have you asked me a question and I think he showed it in court. You said, was he ever humble? Remember you asked me something like, was there ever, well, this guy, he pumped his fist and fell down on his knees, like praying. And it was all performative to me. I mean, show some humility. He could have just said, thank you. But that's like when you score a goal in football, he jumped up and he's not a likable human being, is he? I mean,
and it's in that moment. And I suppose what he's doing there is showing his relief that he isn't going to be cast away in an American jail for the next 20 years of his life. So there's that. But as, that moment passes, he will surely realize that the evidence which has been heard during these trials cannot be unheard it may not have been accepted on the grounds, on the basis of the charges that were before the jury to reach a level of beyond reasonable doubt in what they believed. But the evidence has still been heard, and a lot of it has gone not only unchallenged by Diddy, but he has completely agreed that it all happened, and there was nothing wrong with it.
How could you challenge that video of him grabbing her by the hair and kicking her? And I mean, look, I remember what we watched with bated breath, the OJ verdict. Of course, that was televised. Laws are different state to state, so the cameras are not allowed in New York State. Of course, we saw the OJ trial, but I remember when he not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. All you saw, of course, OJ was an actor, but if you remember, all he did was kind of close his eyes and nod, like you saw him exhale. The guy didn't have the audacity to pump his fist and fall down on it. I mean, so. I just think this guy's hubris and I'm sorry, this guy meaning Sean Combs. Somebody might have been a headline I read on CNN or something saying that, well, this is going to make his behavior worse than ever. Like he's not going to stop, maybe not breaking the law, but mistreating people, thinking he's above. I mean, if you've already been acting like this, like you're above the law, imagine what this does. I mean, I told you they were engaging. He and his latest girlfriend, current girlfriend, were engaging in the freak offs in hotels and stuff after the feds raided him all. So as you said, well, probably he thinks he's doing nothing wrong. And I thought, well, no, it's more like a serial killer. But you're probably right. He thinks I've done nothing wrong.
And now that has somewhat been confirmed to him, although he'll be a little bit more careful about transporting for prostitution across state lines, won't he? He probably won't do that again, maybe, if he's a little bit sensible. But I suppose the thing is that, you know, when a trial as significant and as big and as, you know, which captures everybody's interest, goes the way it does and not guilty, questions are asked about the prosecutors and about who decided to bring these charges and who decided to do this. What sort of narrative is going on about that movement that I suppose brought a lot of things along the Me Too movement? Is that becoming something that is being blamed as this is the Me Too movement having gone too far? And is that what's coming into the narrative?
Sure, there's been that, because there's a sense of, you know, believe all women, and then there were, you know, so the prosecutors were all female, but they were all white women, and this might not be well known in your end of the globe, but James Comey, who was the director of the FBI, who famously went after Hillary's emails, his daughter was one of the prosecutors. So there's all this conspiracy stuff, thinking there's a deep state and Epstein's all tied in, but. I saw some black women lawyers saying, well, it would have been nice if they had a woman of color, because race is becoming a huge section of this. Because let's be honest, I don't know how it is in the UK and in Ireland and in Europe, but in America, a white woman being abused is a different case usually than an African-American woman or an indigenous woman. In Canada, we've had this case. It's horrific. Prostitutes who were indigenous women, dozens and dozens going missing. And they were just never investigated, because the police just thought, well, you know them. They get drunk and run off. I'm saying that in quotes. They do not. But if a perfect victim is John Benet Ramsey, you know, a little white girl, you know. So there was a sense, I think, well, what if one of these girls had been, you know, a white girl? Would the jury have... So race is becoming part of it. The prosecutorial overreach, I think we can all be Monday morning, you know, coaches and quarterbacks. The problem is they wanted to get him on something federal. Domestic violence isn't a federal case. So, and I don't know what else they could have charged him with other than being a horrible human being. But I mean, to bring this case as they did, you know, you remember, as I do, in March, was it March 2024? Seems like decades ago already. and there was this swooping down of raids, and I was wrong. A lot of people were wrong, saying they don't send hundreds of agents and spend this kind of money unless they've got an airtight case. Also, the feds at trial almost always win 99%. This Southern District of New York, the SDNY, is also it's where Rudolph Giuliani. This is the most political. So the track record for this kind of case, if you were a betting person going to the racetrack, you would have said, "Oh, but." It defied the odds. And that goes to show you that, well, I would say there's an upside, which is that the jury system, it works in this,
And Doug, is there any way of, and will there be any way of trying to find out what the jury were thinking? I mean, is it, I know sometimes that here, while you're not allowed to approach a jury or whatever, sometimes after cases, lawyers can get talking and they get a bit of an idea, especially in civil cases, what was going on in your heads. It helps lawyers learn from that. And I know sometimes in the US, on cases I've worked in, the jury members are allowed to do interviews and stuff afterwards. Oh, yeah. So is that the way in New York? Yeah.
Well, they already have. So the way a jury works in the US system is there's 12 seated jurors and alternates. Like I've been called to jury duty as an alternate. That's in case someone gets sick. An alternate was already on. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm allowed to say your networks, but CNN had an exclusive interview with one of the alternates yesterday or the day before, who explained very clearly and cogently what they were thinking. And the guy was very, very, very clear about the law and what they understood and what they were debating. So he's an alternate. And I'm quite sure, I mean, if these people are savvy, they'll get book deals.
Yes, exactly.
This is or exclusive interview. You're not supposed, as journalists, we're not supposed to pay for interviews. But one of the big American networks, for sure, there will be some people come out and say, here's what was going on inside. There's nothing illegal about doing that. They were not sequestered. They were allowed, meaning they did not have to stay in hotels and not watch the news. So yeah, we'll be hearing what they thought. And I'm sure a lot of them will say, we found him reprehensible. We found him disgusting. We found Cassie credible. We found this credible, but we didn't think it rose to the standard of what they explained to us. This is what the alternate, I only heard a bit of it, but he said, we were very clear what racketeering was, and this did not meet that standard.
Yeah.
So we'll hear.
Yeah.
We'll hear what they...
So in the meantime, he will remain in custody and there will be no more further hearings until his sentencing in October.
Yep. And one person said to me, this is how young people think. But you can keep making records because there was a famous case of a dancehall artist, Vybz Kartel, and there's been a couple of hip hop artists. Vybz Kartel was convicted of murder, but he ended up he's home since. He made a bunch of records on phones. Did you hear about this in Ireland?
No.
He was making records on I guess a cell phone or something. So somebody was joking, saying, "Yeah, but he can still drop some albums and stuff. He can add some new releases if he gets quality phones." By the way, in the U.S., you're not allowed to have a cell phone. Every prison, the contraband that goes on in the U.S., every prison that I've ever heard of has illegal cell phones. So they're already joking. Well, he might be making, iTunes releases from. Sorry, I'm not laughing about the severity of the case. I'm just saying how absurd this all sounds. Yeah. But I think the idea of Sean Combs as a brand, as a Ciroc vodka, as a money making, unless he would have to go on this contrition tour, which, by the way, is a big thing in the U.S. You suddenly found God and you've reformed your life. What if it's Minister Sean Combs and he goes around preaching about? America is shameless about that. People can reinvent themselves, and you suddenly say, "Well, he's a changed man." I don't know.
Well, that's going to be between now and October because he certainly didn't show that or any of that in the courtroom. Sure, he didn't, and in his. Even in his cross-examination of the witnesses and all the rest of it, he showed none of that. So,
but he's got his images of him. He loves to dress in these white gowns that almost not a gown, but it's a huge. And I was writing about the early days. Now it's a well-known Jacob and Company, a well-known watch brand. But Jacob Arabo was an Orthodox Jewish jeweler in the Diamond District, and he was the first guy to really create this bling. And he was just a little stall on 47th Street in Manhattan, and he was making a $1.5 million crucifix. He wouldn't tell me who it was for, but I saw it on Sean Combs. Imagine wearing and it was a beautiful.
It sounds a bit bling there for me.
But if you're really praying to Jesus. And do you really want to have $1.5 million? I mean, does that show your more devotion to God? I don't know. So, but no, he's been very big on his Christian faith and his mom. And, one thing about that, his family was all there in support. And I think that might have helped the jury a bit, because you must say, if he'd just been abandoned, if his mom hadn't been there and all his kids, they really had a show of force. I think I said to you, can you imagine being this guy's daughters and they're listening? Well, they did. And maybe they were convinced that what he did in his freakish private life, this is the defense I've heard. Many people have sexual predilections and stuff that we don't know about. And men like to be, wear a dog chain and woof woof around. Well, is that a crime? I mean, and so I think they probably felt, the jury, I would not want to know that this guy wouldn't be my next door neighbor. I would hate to have him, but I don't see this being a massive criminal enterprise, right? So the family, they'll be able to go visit him. Today, of course, is not a big deal in Canada or Ireland, but it is the 4th of July, and he's getting a special meal. It's a hot dog or something. He's getting, like, traditionally in America on 4th of July, you have big barbecues. So they said, Sean, they're covering this case like you can't believe the tabloid level of it. So it said he'll get his normal, like, porridge or whatever crap they get for breakfast, but he will have an option of a burger, or even a bean burger, a vegan burger. I mean, they're people are fixated with celebrity, aren't they?
They sure are. It doesn't sound too hot to me now. A bean burger for your special day. Well, look, Doug, for the moment, we will leave it at that. And no doubt other elements of this whole story of P. Diddy is going to be coming out over the next while. So we will enjoy to have you back.
I would love that. I am curious to know if Ireland even care. Is it just sort of the salacious nature of this name, or he's not a figure much of that people are listening to his records, or he doesn't have his finger on the pulse of pop culture in Ireland at this moment, the way 30 years ago, Diddy and Notorious B.I.G., that was global stuff. I think he's kind of a has-been, I assume.
Yeah, I think, look, he's just such a big celebrity that it doesn't matter where you are in the world. People are interested in what's happened here and what's been said during the trial.
Well, if another shoe drops,
yeah,
so to speak, I would be happy. I mean, we'll see what happens to sentencing, but there will be more crime stories you and I can talk about in the future.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.